I'm the man, son.
We have tried to contact you.
My best friend. My best friend. I'm dancing with you.
That's what I'm insinuating.
My best friend.
Collaborate. Collaborate.
I'm the man, son.
Collaborate. Especially.
I'm the man, son.
Clearly. Collaborate. Clearly.
Sorry, I had to go switch hair ties, and Crafton's like, the fuck are you doing?
And represented by Mr. DeGuerin.
Sentenced yesterday. And we were going to go live last night, and then the internet didn't like us, or StreamYard didn't like us. I haven't quite.
Well, there was a lot of weird shit going on YouTube. YouTube's algorithms started acting really weird. People were having problems all over the place. Chat not showing up here and there. Couldn't see participants, names. Trying to connect. People were. You find all this information over isitdownnow.com, and it will tell you. If you ever wonder if you're YouTube or is it you, I think that's another one. Isitme.com. They will tell you whether or not the big websites are actually experiencing outages. So yeah, YouTube was doing some major update. We were like, this is too
I'm trying to see. I was like, is that Big Bird? It's like, whatever. My eyesight's not always the best anyway. But I'm like, nah, Lala's just got a sassy emoji going for her picture. I like it.
What's up, Liv? Susie, good to see you.
Sugar Beet. Hi,
so everybody.
Heather. All the best friends. All of our best mods.
Heather is there.
Mm-hmm.
And
hi, Susie.
So check out our
I'm so vegan food delivery service ad. Yeah. I know. We trigger it. It's because now we have a short
Yeah, Rose.
that Crafton was going to get whatever it was, my breakfast or lunch or whatever, and did like a little short driving to it. So it's a new business. They
But yeah, Kevin Smith from Clerks, the
yeah.
guy.
Well, and the lady who owns that, her name's
You went
Michelle.
there.
She's awesome. But she was going to start her business, and then COVID hit, like the same exact month.
Mm-hmm.
So she did like a modified version, but she had to wait to open her storefront, and that just happened a couple months ago. So, but I think that's why. But I'm like, yeah, sorry, non-vegans that are getting the vegan ads.
Big Bird.
It's not though. It's an emoji. That's just a testament to my poopy eyesight.
Oh, it does look like it looks like
A little, right?
Big,
You have
Big
to
Bird's
look.
mugshot. Looks like he's staring at the screen. He's like, "Yo."
Yes, all of our
Without
mods
busting.
are our best friends.
So say hello to our mod squad, the best friends 1 through 4,
Yes.
jumping 3. So 3 is a mysterious. But,
Well, three's 3.
Mhm.
You know.
And whoa. But yeah, and we've also got Heather, who is also one of our mods there as well.
Well, and and by the way, we credit Heather for this because
the,
when she began to see that there's any issues with people checking out her, who her mods were, or having to worry about all of that, it's just a good way to be able to do what you need to do. Sometimes you have people on the show and you have guest moderators, and it's a good way to short circuit the drama. So it's an option. By the way, if you watch this
I like
in the
that.
future and you are a wrench, so even Heather, for you,
Short circuit the drama.
it's so true. Yes, no, Best Friend 3 is open, so it's optional. We're not, but it's a good option for those who want to participate in anonymity. And as we said, we have people
thank
that
you,
are letting
ma'am.
us know about alts.
Exactly, Heather.
If you're one of them that is getting any weirdness and you want us to know who you are, we have started our key.
We know who's
So,
who.
right.
And they know.
People have started
Crew
alts
knows.
because they're like, I don't feel like dealing with the bullshit. And they let us know. And we're like, cool. So now we know who we're talking to. And, they only get to tell the people they want to know who they are.
Right.
So yesterday was sentencing. I wasn't sure how victim impact statements were going to go, but, oh, man, I can be a crybaby anyway, but I was in tears. Some of it's very clear where they were going with the statement, but we'll talk about that a little more. The first thing that we'll be listening to, the verdict comes down and sentencing set. This was actually earlier than they anticipated. Doing sentencing, they had to do it for a scheduling conflict. So they did have jurors that came with their spouses. The defense, of course, put in all kinds of bullshit. That's not the legal word, but it's bullshit. And it's just to preserve appeal rights. But so they had to address those and go over their motion for a retrial. So it's not as I don't want to talk too much about victim impact statements and stuff like that until we get there, because we have to deal with listening to Robert Durst's bullshit first. But Judge Windham went over all the various motions and complaints. John Lewin did end up giving more of a argument that I thought we would see, because we all, spoiler alert, they didn't go for the death penalty. We knew that up front. So there was nothing other than life without parole in California. So this was really more about the victims, but, they got in their last half hour of digs.
Heather's asking, for those who don't know who Robert Durst is.
Yep. So Robert Durst, if you've seen The Jinx, he was the subject of that. He's a subject of a lot of sort of crime documentaries and things of that nature. But Robert Durst is, he was the heir apparent to Seymour Durst. Now, their family owns Times Square, one of the bigwigs in the New York real estate landscape. And, he turned out to be sort of the black sheep. He's a psychology mystery. I think that's the lightest, nicest way I can put it, so we don't have to get too far into his psychology. But long story short, he got married. He chose, he left the family business, met Kathy Durst, and they had a very whirlwind relationship and got married. And that went downhill rather fast. It turned into a domestic violence situation. It was very abusive emotionally, physically, financially. And I think, something in his psychology is probably the origin of from way before that. But that's the first one on file. So Kathy Durst goes missing as she's looking at divorcing him and is looking for a fair settlement. And there's a lot of fighting going on, things like that. And she goes missing. Her body was never found. There was a phone call made. There was thought that she had left their country home where, the last place she was seen. Thought that she had made it to New York, but it turns out, fast forward, the doorman who had claimed to see her, well, he was paid by Robert Durst and retracted that. Everything was debunked except for a phone call that was made to her medical school. She was in her very last semester of medical school. Keep in mind, just because she was married to a multimillionaire, he paid for crap. He paid for nothing. Nothing. So she was on student loans, often her car was breaking down. He wouldn't pay for that. She would borrow money for gas from other people, that kind of thing. And the medical school gets a phone call, but it goes into the dean of the medical school. So she was in rotations. It was the first day of her clinic for pediatric surgery, which is what she wanted to do. She didn't call the dean that was her mentor. She didn't Kenny, I know. Kenny's telling you it's bullshit. Okay, he's already, if you can hear him back there. And didn't call the workplace that she was set to show up on the first day. Instead, the phone call goes into the head, the main dean of the medical school, which was very unusual. Fast forward in the course of this trial, I think it was proved, obviously, that Susan Berman made that phone call. Susan Berman was his best friend. Susan Berman is the daughter of Davy the Jew Berman. So Heather is out in Las Vegas, and I'm sure she knows some of that history. So her father was Vegas crime boss, like royalty. He took over Bugsy Siegel. He was a friend of Bugsy Siegel, but he also, that's a whole story unto itself. He took over for Bugsy Siegel after Bugsy Siegel was murdered. He also killed his neighbor at some point. Very famously got off on that. Found innocent, even though he dismembered the body. That's how it got caught. So his Galveston trial ended in a not guilty verdict. In many ways, Robert Durst, until now, had sort of been known with the guy who got away with everything. Yeah. Never has Kathy's body been found. Still. Never have charges been found. We have a video. I'll link the video too. Throw a thumbnail at the end for anyone who watches replay or if you go back. We talked about the various ways that Kathy Durst's family has gone about trying to get justice in the civil court system, only to find that they were barred by statutes of limitation. They've had probate battles. They've had an uphill battle. And I want to note that. I'll probably say a little more about that before we get into the victim impact statements, because it's part of what makes them so moving. So, nevertheless, Susan Berman was killed. God, still delayed justice. I'm like, yeah, so here we are all these years later, and finally, you know. I mean, he's been waiting to go to trial for 6 years. They absolutely delayed this like nobody's business. But he's, you know, he's known for being on the run too. He has no problem hiding out and dressing up as a woman to hide out. You know, he's crazy. Like in the
mute woman.
And yeah, because he's
So
got
did-
that voice, right? Bobby Durst's voice, like. Kathy's brother does the best Bob Durst voice ever. If you've seen the Jinx, it's beautiful, the voice that he does for him. I can't do it without needing to cough, personally. But, you know, so his victim, Morris Black, in Texas, of course, no justice. He did get convicted, but was just sentenced to, you know, time served after the fact. Unfortunately, that court, or the prosecutors, the state of Texas, decided to give it an all or nothing thing, because they thought they had this dismembered body that clearly linked back to him. They thought it was slam dunk. They only charged him with first degree murder and nothing else. No lower charges at all. And that's how he got off. So it was after the fact that they were able to finagle tampering with evidence. Like, that's the best that they got for his presumed second victim, Morris Black, was tampering with evidence. They couldn't even get him for, like, the dismemberment and the different things there, because that would be double jeopardy, because it related and the state didn't do it. So heaven forbid any of us are ever in this situation where we lose a family member. Who you get as a prosecutor is everything. Everything. So he was sentenced yesterday. Susie died on just before Christmas, December 23rd of 2000. Okay, so this took a long time. The Jinx really put a speed on this. So sentencing's good. We will hear from her family members. It's the rules of the court, guys. Like, the McCormicks were there, which is Kathy's family, but they aren't considered the crime victims of this, even though John Lewin really broke history. I mean, seriously, pioneered. This was a pioneering sort of legal argument, which is probably why I was just so obsessed with it. Not that I wasn't into Robert Durst in the first place, in terms of just fascinated and going, and, you know, everything that goes with that. Pissed off, like, how is this guy getting off with so much, like, with the rest of the country, if you guys remember. So back in so Kathy was 2000, which means Morris, he killed his neighbor in 2001. And a lot of people think that it goes the other way, but he had killed Susie first. There was a reopening to look into the death, or the missing person, and it is still an active missing persons case. I'm going to put the link in if I can find it. Kathy still has an open missing persons case. We're going to talk a lot about Kathy at the end, because there is some great rumor milling from inside sources going about what is going on in the state of New York, finally. Because of money, maybe. Yeah. I think that he also just doesn't like when people try to tell him what to do. So, Susie, the conviction that was got in California, the special circumstance in that case, there were a couple. I mean, lying in wait, that's one that you see a lot in California. But the other one was because she was a witness to a crime. So that was part of one of the elements that they had to prove in order to get the yes on that special circumstance that they earned. And the investigation in New York had reopened at that time under Janine Pirro. And so she was, it was proven at trial. She was Susan Berman, his best friend since college, someone who, really protected him, loved him, was shot execution style in the back of the head because the police were looking into him, and he was under the impression that she was going to speak to the police, and so he made sure that didn't happen. The deal with his neighbor, there's likely, and because this is what happened, you guys, John Lewin prosecuted 3 cases in this. I'm telling you. It was crazy. And I'm anybody who watched some of it with us when we were kind of like counting down, to verdict, I was a little concerned because I'm like, I don't know how they are going to take, California's the place if you're going to do a circumstantial, evidence case, in my opinion. However, I felt like there was so much time spent on Kathy and so much time spent on Morris Black. And with Morris Black, really it was peripheral evidence that he was using that for. It was a very limited scope that he was even allowed to use it for. And that had to do with the fact that he's a fucking liar. He's a liar on the stand, who prides himself with getting away with things. And like I said, there's not any justice left to get for Morris, sadly. The best he, his family, his friends ever will get is what they did, which is the time that Bob spent in prison waiting for trial before he was found not guilty, and then eventually tampering with evidence. That's horror. I mean, I've said it before, I don't care what kind of person Morris Black was, because there are rumors and all kinds of things out there, including here on YouTube, about sort of smearing his character. But the case is complex. Robert Durst is complex. But his neighbor, who is found not guilty, so now we're talking my opinion only, and Crafton can share his if it varies, but my opinion, he was killed because he knew who Robert Durst was by then, and he did admit that. Robert admitted that. But yeah, absolutely. I think it was about money. It was about an ultimatum. I think all 3 of these people share that they in some way said something that equaled an ultimatum, and nobody tells Robert Durst what to do. Even while he was a free man for all those years, between, 2000 and I think 2 or 3 was when he, let me look that up. I don't want to give you wrong information. But when he was found not guilty, I mean, he was a free man.
Yeah.
The last thing that he got in legal trouble all the time after that, the last thing he got in legal trouble for was because somebody in a CVS pissed him off. So he decided he was going to whip it out and piss all over a candy rack in the middle of the store, which of course never saw its way to adjudication even, because he ended up just paying big old fines and they settled for that. But so the guy's just kind of, I'd love to see his psychology report. I really would. Do we have Venmo? I don't know if I have a Venmo. I'll have to look. Let me just check on these. So if we want to get into it, so this is yesterday. So Susie Berman's case ended up really being a trial that integrated so much of his other 2 victims that it ended up being a beacon of justice for the 3. Like I said, I'll link the video because I don't want to waste any more time with that, but I'll link the video at the end. We'll have a card there for replays, or if you come back, just go to the end. And we're going to chapter mark this too for people that just want to get into the victim impact statements. But he's guilty. Finally, finally, he's guilty. Kathy's family deserves some justice. And John Lewin is just up there in my book now. I mean, seriously. It was brilliant legally. It was brilliant. And he more than gift wrapped a case for New York. So we will talk about that at the end as well. So we're going to... You have a slideshow ready to go, honey?
Well, I just the one that we have.
All right, so we're going to start slideshow. These are, some of the people we've been talking about. Anybody familiar with the case knows, but
It's the victims.
yeah. So we're keeping it to the victims today because this is really
Yeah, it's very small.
very for
slideshow.
them. These are people that are no longer here.
With only one chance to see him as the young dude back in the day. We're keeping him otherwise.
So we're going to listen first to the bullshit of what his defense team decided to do. Again, this is all to preserve his appeal rights. He's 78 years old, you guys. So I don't know. I'd love for New York to step in, if for no other reason than the guy can't take all his moolah with him, right? His defense was not a $10 million defense, but that's what it cost. This trial cost 5 times as much as Galveston, and I swear, half the time, I think his lawyers, my opinion, were asleep at the wheel half the time. It was just felt to me a lot of the time like they just knew how this was gonna come out. So this is their final gripe session. So here's our, homage to Dick DeGuerin. And we can converse and chat here of things as they come up. So,
and cameras will go on and off as we pop in. But we're listening and chat, obviously. So,
hi, Addicted to Shoes. Good to see you. Anybody who's come in that I missed.
And any of our mods, get with Rose on aliasing up to the
Yes.
best friend crew because
Anybody, or get
we
a hold
don't
of
want any
get a hold of
residual
us,
drama
or-
coming your way. And
Oh, my chat just disappeared. That's weird.
yeah, there's a weird.
It's very buggy.
But
It's super
YouTube has
buggy.
got weird bugs lately. Probably some NSA stuff. Who knows?
What are you talking about? Hi, Shar.
What am I?
What is some NSA stuff?
It's a joke. I'm saying YouTube's got to scan the packets.
I don't.
And get the government.
I don't think Morris killed Susan at all. No,
I don't either.
I think this verdict was totally right.
No way.
Bobby,
She wouldn't have known
absolutely, yes, exactly. She opened the door to this person at an off time of day.
Yeah.
She was like deadbolt queen.
It was a close.
High cement.
Boom. It was a line.
Yep,
line
and in
boy.
the end, he admitted being there. Robert Durst admitted being there, and only this time, hey, I just found the body, which eventually, that was eventually. I think the judge tells it like it is. So like I said, unfortunately, we have to listen. Luckily, it's Judge Windham that's reading off all of this crap that was filed post-verdict. And so we don't necessarily have to listen to DeGuerin and crew. Let's see, were you in law during the sentencing? I saw Rose there. I was not Sugar Beat, so I was listening and watching because I wanted to watch this one. So whereas usually I'll go about work and all that stuff, listening in my headset, this one I really wanted to see. I was
in there.
I got emotional too. It was.
Yeah. That's why we added the trigger warning because that's an emotional one. There are moments in here that are just overwhelming as you would assume.
Loofah. My cat tries. My cat. Someone's saying in chat that their kittens won't let them check. They're all over the keyboard. Yeah, ours likes to steal phones too. We think she's gonna call her kitty boyfriends. We don't know.
Yeah.
All right, you guys. So
All right,
it's about it's roughly a half an hour. And again, we can't use. We have access to audio. We do not have access to video. That is exclusive rights to Law and Crime Network.
Okay, you ready?
Yes.
All right, here we go.
And represented by Mr. DeGuerin, Mr. Kesnoff, Mr. Lewis, and today pro hac vice Ms. Childress and Ms. Mr. Garcia. I believe Ms. Ames is present also for the defendant. And Mr. Ray is excused, or is he on the line?
He's excused, Your Honor.
All right. I did excuse him.
Your Honor, before we start, I know
Before we, I'm sorry. For the people, we have Mr. Lewin, Mr. Valian, Mr. Emilius, Mr. Miyata, and Mr. Henderson. Mr. Lewin.
Yes, I saw at least 3 of our jurors that were outside, Your Honor. Just wanted to make sure the court was aware.
Let's see, where is, I did note that they were welcome to be seated here. We're going to honor our jurors for their service. Let's see. Deputy Watch. We didn't forget our jurors, did we, Deputy Watchman? Are they able to come in?
Didn't mean to interrupt the court, Your Honor.
No, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't want to go forward without them being here. I did invite them to, when I learned that they were interested, I invited any jurors who wished to be present for these proceedings. Here they come, tiptoeing through. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. I'm so glad to see you again. We're grateful for the sacrifice you made and all the time you expended, months and months, in serving your community as jurors in this case. So I welcome you back to the courtroom for the sentencing proceedings. Let's proceed. Are both sides ready to proceed?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Mr. DeGuerin, do you waive arraignment for judgment?
We do, Your Honor.
As for legal cause, if there is legal cause why judgment should not be entered, the defense has filed a motion for a new trial. And I've read and considered that motion. Do you have anything to add to your written
No, Your Honor.
submission?
Consider it submitted.
Very well. Nevertheless, I'll allow you to respond if the people have an argument. Mr. Lewin, do the people wish to respond to the new trial motion?
Yes, we do, Your Honor. Thank you.
You may proceed.
Your Honor, as the court is aware, because there were no issues of legal disagreement regarding the standard for new trial, and since there is no issue regarding the authority that was cited, what we are going to be commenting on are going to be the arguments that were made by counsel. And I think it's important because we want to make sure that a reviewing court, looking at the entire record, understands what actually took place in this court and what didn't. So I'm going to start, and I'm going to go through the issues with the defense motion for new trial, factually and legally.
Keep in mind that each of these issues, as we've had here on each of these issues, I've ruled on these issues. There was extensive briefing and argument. But with that, you may add what you think is necessary, Mr. Lewin.
Thank you, Your Honor. So the defense indicated in Section A, the verdict was contrary to the evidence. They said, quote, specifically, there was insufficient evidence to establish that Mr. Durst committed first-degree murder and that he shot and killed Susan Berman with a firearm. Obviously, an array of direct and circumstantial evidence was presented, including numerous confessions, the cadaver note, and the admission that that was the note that only the killer could have written. They said there was insufficient evidence to establish the special circumstance that Mr. Durst killed Susan Berman because she was a, quote, witness. Obviously, just a confession to Nick Chavin alone would have been more than sufficient. We had numerous information, including the note Mr. Durst's statements and his testimony on both direct and cross-examination. Defense says at trial there was no forensic evidence to support that Mr. Durst allegedly killed Kathy Durst or that he killed Susan Berman. First of all, forensic evidence is not required, but obviously, what forensic evidence would we have for Kathy Durst?
You can slow down a bit.
Sure, Your Honor. What forensic evidence would we have for Kathy Durst? He got rid of her body. For Susan Berman, he shot her from behind and has admitted finding her body allegedly hours after she was killed, yet with no rigor mortis at all, and when she was cold. So the fact that there is no forensic evidence is really a red herring and an irrelevancy. He says, quote, moreover, it is respectfully submitted that there was insufficient evidence at trial to establish that Mr. Durst called Susan Berman to coordinate a stage call at Kathy's medical school and Dean Cooperman. Well, Miss Susan Berman told no less than 6 people who testified, plus Mr. Durst admitted on cross-examination he was aware of 2 other people that she had told years earlier about this same evidence. In addition, the fact that there was no call, we know that Mr. Durst, by his own admission, was using payphones, and he also could have certainly contacted Susan Berman personally. So this is, again, another red herring. They say, quote, specifically, during the trial, Detective Joe Becerra testified, and then they have a bunch of citations to his testimony, which are either misrepresented or completely misplaced. I'm not going to go through even close to all that they listed. I will go through just a couple so that the reviewing court is aware of the flavor of what exactly they have alleged. They say at page 87 and 88, they cite the transcript. Furthermore, Detective Becerra testified that he found no evidence supporting that Kathy Durst died in a South Salem house or that Susan Berman helped provide an alibi for Mr. Durst. So when they say he found no evidence, what does that even mean? The evidence that was presented clearly demonstrated that Mr. Durst was responsible for Kathy's death. Whether that death was murder, whether it was manslaughter, whether it was even accident, does not matter. And this is a misplaced citation. He says, again in his motion, Detective Becerra further testified that he had not even reached out to Susan Berman to interview her, nor did any other law enforcement prior to her death. However, whether he called her is actually irrelevant because Susan Berman told Mr. Durst, which he admitted in prior interviews and on the stand, that Susan Berman had told him she'd been contacted by authorities and was going to speak to them. That is what signed her death warrant, and that's why he killed her. They say in their motion that the evidence at trial established that the lead detective in the reinvestigation of Kathy's disappearance, that's Detective Becerra, found no evidence to support that Mr. Durst killed Kathy Durst or that Susan Berman was a witness or assisted Mr. Durst in any criminal way. There was not a separation of evidence that was found by Detective Becerra versus evidence that was found by either the New York State Police, the New York Police Department earlier, Los Angeles Police Department Robbery Homicide Division during the reinvestigation. This is, again, a nonsensical and irrelevant point. They say, furthermore, the prosecution presented no evidence at trial which connected any weapon used in the murder of Susan Berman to Mr. Durst. Specifically, the alleged murder weapon was never recovered. Mr. Durst was never found to possess the alleged murder weapon, and the shell casing found in Ms. Berman's house did not match any other casing in the police system or any of Mr. Durst's firearms. Well, the evidence is very simple. Mr. Durst got rid of the murder weapon, the same thing that he attempted to do in Galveston, and the only reason they recovered it was because they got to the house because Mr. Durst was sloppy, and they located the gun in the trash. They go on to say that, quote, and again, as this honorable court will recall, there was no forensic evidence at trial which established that Mr. Durst shot and killed Susan Berman. 1, forensic evidence is not required. 2, what forensic evidence would you expect to get when you come up behind somebody and execute them in the back of the head when there is no struggle? In addition, despite the defense arguments that there was no evidence of Mr. Durst and that, quote, no evidence is evidence, unquote, The problem is that Mr. Durst has admitted he was in the house. So the fact that we have no evidence that he was in the house certainly demonstrates that you cannot believe in any way, shape, or form that the killer, even if somehow they were not Mr. Durst, would have left any evidence in this scenario. They continue, rather the evidence at trial established that the crime scene investigation was incomplete and flawed. Again, there was no evidence to support this. This is just a naked attack post-trial on the fine investigation done by the Los Angeles Police Department. If they had evidence of a flawed forensic investigation, we would have expected that to have been presented. It was not. Moreover, the evidence at trial established that individuals were able to access Ms. Berman's home even after her body was found. And they say, see testimony of Susan Berman and Paul Coulter. Now, obviously, the fact that people were able to access it after the murder is not a helpful scenario, but there's no indication whatsoever that that has anything to do with who killed her or with any of the forensic evidence or lack of forensic evidence that was found. The evidence also established, they continue, that Ms. Berman made up stories for attention, had enemies, and there may have been situations where she would open the door for a stranger. See testimony of Mel Kaufman. There was no evidence as to why Susan Berman would make up a story that her best friend had killed his wife. There's a lot of reasons why she would lie to protect him. None presented why she would make it up. In addition, nobody testified that they believed that Susan Berman, late at night or early in the morning, would open the door to a stranger. And if you look at the clothing she was in, it appears that she was in her night clothing, that she had already changed for bed or had not changed back into regular clothes the next day, and was killed when she was in an extremely vulnerable position. They again say that rather than relying on forensic evidence at trial, the prosecution largely relied on witnesses who provided statements to law enforcement many years after Susan Berman's death. Again, what forensic evidence would you expect to have, especially when Mr. Durst now admits that he was there and found the body, and the idea that they relied on statements of individuals that occurred many years later. Mr. Durst himself contradicted his own lawyer's theory, the theories of his expert witness, Dr. Loftus, by saying that the witnesses were not lying, they were not mistaken, that Susan had originally lied. They say additionally, is respectively submitted, that the testimony of Mr. Durst did not establish that he shot and killed Susan Berman. I would simply say, other than a straight confession that he had done it, how exactly could his testimony have, quote, established that he shot Susan? What his testimony did was completely impeach him regarding every significant issue in the case. They say in conjunction with the cadaver note and his testimony, the evidence at trial only established his mere presence at the scene after he located Miss Berman's body. So his, quote, mere presence, which he denied for 20 years, is incredibly incriminating, especially considering the absurdity of his statements, the fact that he wrote the cadaver note, and the fact that he has repeatedly said only the killer could have written it. Finally, he says that it should be noted there was no evidence found on Ms. Berman's computer which suggested that she was extorting Mr. Durst or that she helped cover up anything related to Kathy Durst. Well, Mr. Durst himself, the court remembers when we were discussing the November 5th letter, Mr. Durst himself, upon cross-examination, said, of course she's asking me for money. Anybody reading this would know that. Susie Berman was an intelligent woman. There's not an issue that she was blackmailing Mr. Durst. There's an issue that she was in a position of power. She had a secret. She was asking Mr. Durst for money. And at a point in time, he either got too tired of paying her or more likely was concerned that even if he did pay her, she would end up telling what she knew, something that she had been doing unbeknownst to him for the last 20 years. Section B says the court erred in deciding questions of law. They say the following. In addition to the insufficient evidence presented at trial, it is respectfully submitted that this honorable court erred in deciding questions of law and a new trial is warranted. They say they are not limited, but they discuss the following. The court erred in not granting a mistrial due to the extended delay in the trial between March 2020 and May 2021. On May 11, 2021, in denying defendants writ of mandate and request for immediate stay, the Court of Appeals stated, and they didn't have to say this, quote, petitioner does not demonstrate that the respondent court abused its discretion, the standard, in denying his most recent motion for mistrial, or that he otherwise is entitled to extraordinary relief. Then they cited the same case that the court cited. The Court of Appeal, as this court is aware, generally simply says, this is an evidentiary matter, we're not going to hear it. But they literally in advance said, there's no abuse of discretion. That claim is meritless. They say the court erred in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence related to the Morris Black case, including admitting the numerous photographs of the severed body parts of Morris Black. This has been a constant refrain from the defense. It ignores all the reasons the court has previously outlined as to why the evidence was admitted at trial. In addition, the defense does not address the March 26, 2021 denial, by the Court of Appeal of their writ of mandate regarding this same issue. I'm not going to go through it. The court made a very good record, a very proper record. It would have been impossible for the court to have separated out the Morris Black killing from the other evidence in the case. And when Mr. Durst, when his alibi was, I found the body and I just panicked, just that statement in itself, which is the identical defense he used in Galveston, would have made that evidence admissible. The court made a very proper record. I won't continue. The court erred in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence related to Mr. Durst wanting Kathy Durst to have an abortion. The defense again ignores all the reasons the court spelled out in granting the motion on this issue, as well as the court's ruling during the hearing on the relitigation of the issue. As with most of these issues, Your Honor, and sometimes to the people's frustration, as happens with advocates, the court generously let the defense relitigate. You gave them every opportunity to furnish new authority, to come up with different arguments. They couldn't do it. You were more than diligent. You were extremely thorough, and you were extremely patient all of the times we relitigated this and these other issues. The court erred in in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence related to the alleged incident involving Peter Schwartz. The people filed the motion to allow the domestic violence evidence to come in under Zach and Lincoln Auger because we were putting on evidence that the defendant had killed Kathy Durst, which was necessary, that evidence, with respect to proving the special circumstance. In other words, we had a right to put on the defendant's motive for killing her to support the special circumstance, and the evidence against Peter Schwartz, involving Peter Schwartz, was clearly domestic violence. It was clearly relevant. The court erred in not allowing Mr. Durst to introduce evidence of sightings of Kathy Durst in New York City, including in relation to Eddie Lopez. Now, this is an extremely important point that I want to make sure is addressed once and for all. This argument is not just inaccurate, it's disingenuous. As we have previously related, we repeatedly approached the defense for years, offering to stipulate to the hearsay statements of Eddie Lopez, providing that all of the hearsay statements that he had given would be admitted. So we said, if you want to bring in the statements Eddie Lopez made, no problem, but you don't get to choose which ones you put in. They knew that Eddie Lopez would be thoroughly impeached if all the evidence came in, so they made a tactical decision not to do it. Now, the problem is that much of the impeachment related to witnesses who were outside the country. I extended that deadline, as the court is aware, 2 years. I lodged 2 different emails with the court. I talked to every member of their team, collectively and individually, regarding this issue for 5 years. They made their decision, and the court remembers, it was not until the trial had already started that they had a change of mind, and now we no longer had access to these witnesses who were out of the country, and they decided they wanted to present this evidence. In addition, and as the court stated, the hearsay evidence from Eddie Lopez was simply not trustworthy, and appeared to have been the result of an attempt of fabrication involving the defendant and Eddie Lopez. The court erred in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence related to alleged domestic incidents of violence between Mr. Durst and Captain Durst. I've already discussed that. The court erred in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence that Mr. Durst allegedly threatened his brother Douglas. We originally filed our motion on March of 2020. We filed a second motion subsequent to that. The defense never filed an opposition. And in fact, the authority that we cited, if the court remembers, the issue with Douglas Durst related to connecting up the threats he was making to Douglas Durst, saying he wanted to kill him, with the note he had written saying, "This makes me feel like I felt about, Kathy is making me feel," I'm sorry, Douglas Durst is making me feel the way that I felt about Kathy. And circumstantially, when you again look at the calls that were admitted, that was evidence that he had, in fact, killed Kathy. They said that the court erred in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence related to the interrogation in New Orleans after Mr. Durst was arrested. As the court's aware, this was an especially upsetting objection to me because they didn't just object to it. They said that I committed prosecutorial misconduct, that I was unethical, even though the law was very clear from the start. And I told them at the beginning, if you have legal authority, use it. If you're just going to get out there and try to say I'm unethical and that my office was improper, that's really not dealing fairly. They had no authority to support it. The court, as was expected, despite all the relitigation, properly let that statement in. The court erred in permitting the prosecution to introduce evidence related to the search of Mr. Durst's hotel room in New Orleans. They lost the 1538.5 motion. They never appealed it. They also lost the same motion in federal court. So in the end, that evidence came in because, as we are aware, when you look at inevitable discovery, an independent source, the evidence was going to come in whether there was a violation or not. The court erred in prohibiting Mr. Durst from presenting third-party culpability evidence. Now, at the time they filed their motion, which was litigated on December 2nd, 2019, their position was that Bob Durst had never been in the house. They stated, quote, "The evidence against Mr. Durst does not contain any forensic proof that he was at the victim's residence. It contains no eyewitness accounts of the defendant being seen there or his car being seen there." They basically sought to present the kitchen sink of third-party culpability defenses, arguing several different mutually exclusive theories, including but not limited to, Nile Brenner, her agent, did it. She was killed by the mob. She was killed by her 90-year-old landlord. I could go on, but it's pretty clear. The court erred in denying the request to recuse myself because I was a witness related to evidence presented at trial. This was litigated. It was an unsupported motion to begin with. Everything was taped. Again, they did their best. They tried to portray me as I was the villain of this trial. It didn't work. They put it again in this motion. It was properly and legally ruled upon by the judge. The court erred in showing the jury the movie All Good Things and the Jinx. That was their quote. The jury was never shown the Jinx. We've been in this court for 6 years, and the defense puts in their new trial motion, they erred showing the Jinx. It never happened. All Good Things came in because it was one giant adoptive admission by Mr. Durst. The court was also very clear in explaining to the jury what the limits of that use of the evidence were. The court erred in applying the journalist shield for Andrew Jarecki in his Hit the Ground Running. Well, we litigated this repeatedly, and then in the end, the defense stipulated they had a chance to call Mr. Jarecki and decided they wanted to stipulate, which they did. The court erred in finding that Andrew Jarecki and Hit the Ground Running were not agents of the prosecution and law enforcement. This was thoroughly litigated. We had numerous hearings on it. It wasn't close. Mr. Jarecki was a very persistent filmmaker. He did what journalists do. He attempted to get information from wherever he could get it from. He was very successful in getting that information. There was never any direction from law enforcement to Mr. Jarecki. There were never any guidance or instructions from law enforcement to Mr. Jarecki. And as the court is aware, when Mr. Jarecki ended up paying a visit to Mr. Durst, after Mr. Durst was in custody, and as the defense is well aware, and I called Mr. Jarecki and said, you know what, I don't like you doing that. His response was, which is completely legal, you don't control what I do. And he's absolutely right. We didn't control him then. We didn't control him from the start of the case. That is an argument that is completely unsupported. Finally, the court erred in denying Mr. Durst's pretrial request to exclude handwriting evidence. Under what legal authority, Your Honor, could the court have suppressed the handwriting evidence, which is specifically admissible pursuant to Evidence Code Section 1417 and 1418? In addition, he stipulated that he wrote the cadaver note. So I'm trying to understand this. So is the argument, Your Honor, if you wouldn't have let in this relevant admissible evidence, then my client wouldn't have admitted he wrote it. He could have lied about it and maybe got away with it. So that is the summation of some of the areas. Again, Your Honor, there's not one even tiny ground for the granting of a mistrial. The court has had the patience of a saint, and I understand that I'm not necessarily the easiest litigant to deal with either, but we briefed every issue thoroughly, repeatedly, and I think effectively, and in the end, the court made the rulings, not with a scorecard, but based on the laws of the state of California. And with that, Your Honor, I would submit it. Thank you.
Mr. Chesnut, please reply. Mr. Scarry.
We submitted it, and Mr. Lewin just repeated all our arguments, so I'm glad we submitted it, so you didn't have to listen to it twice. It's up to you, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. He said the court erred so many times I started feeling self-conscious.
Well, it wasn't me. It was I'm just repeating their motion.
Hope that hurt.
They said worse about
In
me.
response to that, Your Honor, the court knows that in the proceeding that lasted 5 years, lawyers litigate. There always are differences of opinion. That's what this motion is about, and that's what the appeal will be about. So we do have issue with things that occurred. The court did give us the opportunity to litigate all of them, and we just have a difference of opinion on the legal conclusion that the court reached. Thank you.
And if I might be facetious, Your Honor, Coach Bum Phillips said, don't dance in the end zone. People will think you've never been there before.
Thank you for that, Mr. Gary. All right. All right. As to the sufficiency of evidence, Mr. Durst confessed to the crime and the special circumstance of witness killing to Nick Chapin. The crime scene evidence provides the minimum corroboration a confession requires. This is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. The logical inferences from the crime scene itself prove lying in wait and use of a firearm beyond a reasonable doubt. Mr. Durst's statement that only the killer could have written the cadaver note, which obviously is true, and then his admission that he wrote that note, proves his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt a second way. His bathroom confession to 3 killings on a nationwide broadcast is a confession he cannot and did not explain. That proves his guilt in a third independent way. Over the course of 4 months, the people presented voluminous circumstantial evidence which proves guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, independent of the defendant's statements. The defendant's testimony was profoundly incredible and incriminating, but his explanation of some of his previous incriminating statements was even more incriminating, that he was trying to get a plea bargain, which is another admission of guilt. There's no other reason for Mr. Durst to seek a plea bargain. This is the 5th way the case is proved, beyond a reasonable doubt. There is sufficient evidence, indeed overwhelming evidence of guilt. As to the 15 alleged legal errors, I reviewed the rulings and I remain confident that each of them is correct, as I previously explained at great length. I will briefly reiterate. First, the procedural claim about the pandemic adjournment. Good cause was shown, prejudice was not. Second, admission of Morris Black evidence, including photos of Mr. Black after Mr. Durst had dismembered him. This was relevant under 1101B of the Evidence Code and more probative than prejudicial. The third claim, Kathy's abortion. This is evidence of the decline of the relationship leading to domestic violence and resulting ultimately in Mr. Durst's motive to kill her. It's more probative than prejudicial. Fourth, the Peter Schwartz assault, that was relevant because it triggered the argument leading to her killing. It's a form of domestic violence admissible under 1101B. It's more probative than prejudicial. Fifth, the excluded supposed sightings of Kathy Durst. That's unreliable hearsay with no exception, indeed, I would say fraudulent, but the jury heard about supposed sightings from witness Doug Oliver, and that raised no reasonable doubt. Six, domestic violence against Kathy, clearly admissible under 1101B and highly probative. Seven, the threat to Douglas Durst was admitted as circumstantial evidence because of Robert Durst's written statement of identical intent toward Kathy. 8, the New Orleans interrogation. The defendant knowingly and intelligently waived his Fifth Amendment rights and had not yet been charged, so the Sixth Amendment did not attach. 9, search of the New Orleans hotel room. This was carefully litigated. Nobody violated his rights. 10th, third-party culpability evidence. No one else was connected to the crime by this evidence. It's therefore not admissible under California law. 11, I'm going to address that one separately. 12, all good things, contained powerful adoptive admissions and was presented with two very clear and firm contemporaneous limiting instructions and a third warning concurrent with the final instructions. The jinx was not shown to the jury, so that claim is incorrect. 13, applying the journalist shield to Mr. Jarecki. This was a pretrial discovery. At trial, the court did not limit cross-examination, agreeing with the defense position. The point was moot because the people did not call him in rebuttal. 14, ruling that Mr. Jarecki was a journalist and not a law enforcement agent was in the context of a discovery motion. It's highly speculative that he possessed anything the defense did not know about or that he possessed anything remotely exculpatory. 15, admission of handwriting evidence. The court followed Sargon versus Regents of the University of Southern California in admitting the evidence and allowed the defense every opportunity to refute the handwriting evidence at trial. But the defense stipulated that it could be admitted. Ultimately, the jury is authorized by the evidence code to make their own comparison. So this really is a non-issue. Even if these claims were valid and evidence was wrongly admitted, it would be harmless given the confession in McShaven and the bathroom confession, which are proof independent from any of the contested evidentiary issues. As for exclusion of defense evidence, this evidence was incompetent as proof, speculative at best, and not worthy of belief, given that Mr. Durst repeatedly admitted the killings. As to the procedural issue, that's the 11th claim, not recusing Mr. Lewin. Now, the circumstances fell well short of a legal basis for recusal, but even if this ruling were incorrect, and Mr. Lewin's presentation of his own investigation somehow tainted Mr. Chavin's testimony or the New Orleans interrogation of the defendant, the televised bathroom confession is completely independent from Mr. Lewin's investigative actions and establishes guilt of the charged crime as well as the killing of Kathy Durst, which supplies the only plausible motive for Susan Berman's murder, which corroborates evidence of witness killing that predates Mr. Lewin's participation. The manner of the killing establishes lying in wait, regardless of anything Mr. Lewin could possibly have affected by his participation in the investigation. Mr. Lewin's presentation of the evidence was unusual, indeed extraordinary. Sometimes in taped interviews, he would state personal beliefs, which could have been considered vouching, but I instructed the jury that the statements of attorneys are not evidence. Their questions are not evidence, only the answers are evidence. Moreover, whenever given the opportunity, I struck such statements. For example, in the New Orleans interrogation of Mr. Durst. But I did not strike such statements when the defense stipulated to their admission. In any event, not only is this argument waived by the stipulations, but it's also cured by the instructions I gave, and harmless due to the overwhelming evidence. It's unaffected by these concerns. And it's not vouching. Mr. Lewin's preparation and presentation were unique and unprecedented, but always lawful and ethical, and in some, commendable. The motion for a new trial is denied. Is there any other legal cause why judgment should not be pronounced?
No, Your Honor.
Do people wish to present statements from Susan Berman's family?
Yes, Your Honor. There's 4 total, and the first speaker will be Denny Marcus, Denimarcus.
All right, thank you. Denny Marcus may come forward. Now, I'm going to welcome your words. Denny Marcus may come forward. Good afternoon, Ms. Marcus, and she's accompanied by?
My son, Tommy Marcus.
All right, Ms. Marcus, good afternoon. I'm glad that you could be here today. And I want you to know, there are some ground rules. And this is a time for you to address me.
Okay, so this is going to roll right into victim impact statements. So a reminder that Kathy's family was there. Several jurors were there with their families. As far as I know, no one from Morris Black's. Like I said, I'd be interested if anyone ever finds stuff on Morris Black that isn't Galveston defense hoo-ha on his character. Because surely the guy has to have family or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, yeah. I get it. Cantankerous old guy, whatever. I've known a lot of endearing cantankerous old people. Who knows, right? So there's just hard to find any good information out there about him. If anybody ever finds that, please let me know, because I feel bad sometimes we don't talk a lot about him, but that's because there's not a lot out there that isn't Robert Durst narrative. So this is going to parlay in. So these are friends and family of Susan Berman that are going to speak. They're, announced as they come up because we were talking amongst ourselves. We missed the beginning, so we're right in the middle. But he's explaining the rules he set out is that they cannot address Robert Durst directly. So anything that they have to say, they'll have to say to him. And I think it's logical what he's doing there. Judge Windham's trying to avoid some of the, there's plenty of things even here on YouTube. You can see like the dramatic moments and victim impact statements where fathers are diving, and I would probably be that mother, but diving over to try to get to the defendant, and people looking and screaming at the defendant. That's what he's trying to avoid. Yeah. So it kind of helps keep it a little, but I think when they get to the second victim impact statement, I think you're going to see sort of what was decided between.
Thank you, Tam.
Oh, Tam, thank you. That's great. That is so generous. Thank you. So this first one is family friend, and then it gets into her family, her kin, and I'm just going to prep everybody that it all is emotional to me because you can hear it in their voices. But what you're going to see is that clearly a decision was made to plea to Robert Durst in the course of their own statements about their loved one to please give closure to the McCormicks. And that becomes an ongoing theme in the remainder. So I wanted to make sure to kind of segue, because
And I'm gonna
So new
pin-
trial, everybody's been listening, but I know we're all chatting and stuff too. But so new trial denied. That's not a shock. So got all that out of the way. John Lewin's a piece of shit. That was their argument. Nope, he's not. Hey, Judge Windham, you're a piece of shit. Nope, he's not. That's the extent of the defense arguments. They pretty much tried to relitigate every ruling against them and lost. So that's not overly shocking. I didn't make a big deal about that because, again, that's all about preserving their appeal rights. So they're going to throw everything in the kitchen sink in there. I will say that my favorite defense argument for a new trial was that John Lewin himself, the prosecutor, should be disallowed because he's a witness.
How?
Because he's the prosecutor that was investigating the death of Susan Berman in his own jurisdiction. Because for anyone who doesn't know, by the way, so DDA John Lewin, he is kind of the cold case guy there. So, and this was a cold case. I mean, it had been 20 years. So, yeah, I mean, so that's not uncommon. I mean, let's go to OJ. You guys know I love to reference back to OJ, but it's also an easy one where people know the players. Marcia Clark was at that scene the very next day. They assign a prosecutor right away. I mean, if it's not, when it's something like a murder, that happens. So that's just the weirdest thing I've heard ever. But I think we saw during the trial that DeGuerin didn't trouble himself too much to figure out California law before he stepped foot in their courtroom. So it's not overly shocking that he would make some of these arguments, but some of them I'm like, it's a pretty stinky argument. That doesn't even seem legally sound. But that was my favorite. I'm like, oh, he's a witness because he was interrogated.
He went to made that trip and interrogated.
Who got killed first? Susan. Yeah. Susan was killed before Morris. So to show up out at, but then but that wasn't even the case. He wasn't even there for all that. It's like he was a person of interest. There was no question. So, but when he was arrested on gun charges in Louisiana, that's when the notorious, actually I'll link that too. I need to make a note for myself so I remember what I want to link. I will link John Lewin's oh my gosh, do I still have the link? And I'm going to put the whole playlist once we get going again. I built a playlist. Let me just make sure before I put it in, I'll make sure that I have the verdict in there too. But I have the full playlist. Like I said, Law and Crime has like exclusive rights to the camera footage in the courtroom. So AP is audio only anywhere else you go. So we're in that camp. But the visuals are, especially on these, this is one, like I said, usually I would catch up from the daily court. So this was a 4-month trial. If you don't count the COVID, gap, they were...
But the visual,
but
the link you were talking about.
But I wanted to see everything. So I'll put the, I made a playlist of all of their footage, which is where you can see, unredacted audio. With the visual, with the camera in the courtroom. So it's a little bit different, but that way you have an option. And I'll link the video of John Lewin's interview that they're basing that on, but it's poop. It's like he went and interviewed him like any prosecutor would, and he was friendly with him. He was good. He was clever at talking to him, and he did.
And it sounds like he may have. Do you think he talked to Andrew Jarecki by then?
Of course, he talked to Andrew Jarecki. Andrew Jarecki was not a witness. Mm-hmm. My double negative there. Until the judge ruled in this trial that he's covered by the journalistic shield laws that they have in California.
So he knew all he had to do was just placate his ego a little bit and get friendly with him, and the
Make
guy
no
just
mis-
won't
yeah.
stop.
Make no mistake,
on
Jarecki and Schmerlock had a huge part in this, as did her son, who's going to speak second, you guys. So we'll get going on this, and I'll pull up some of those links for you to throw. I'll put the link to the playlist in, and it's all in order. And so anybody who wants to go back to look at anything can use that.
All right, here we go.
About what happened and how this may have affected you. This is not an opportunity for you to speak to Mr. Durst. Please direct your comments to me and not to the defendant, Mr. Durst, if you will. You may proceed.
Where do I begin? I was robbed, and my beautiful son was robbed of an absolutely extraordinary, unforgettable, brilliant person whose life was savagely taken from her at 55 when she had many years ahead. And she and I discussed, she was much more like a sister. She lived with my family. She was orphaned at 13. And I didn't even know she wasn't my sister until I was 6. And my parents explained that she went to boarding school because she was under the guardianship of other people and she would spend all the holidays with us. But she was unforgettable. She took me on madcap adventures. All of my friends and close ones knew her as her alter ego, Auntie Mame. And she had so much love, and she was so valuable. Her value as a human being is just priceless. And the fact that we were all robbed of the additional 30 or 40 years that she definitely had left to do some things, and she was a loyal, fabulous friend. And that, and at the end of her life, as the regressions and the memories came up, the phobias got a little more pronounced, but God bless her, she used them. She used them in her manuscripts and in her pitch meetings, and she kept trying, and she never gave up, even when life became quite dire. And she lost all of her money, and people that she loved and trusted and gave the money to were, nowhere to be found. The last 7 years, we spoke mostly every day, and she, even during that time, and I had my challenges with being a single mother to this fabulous person right here, she was always so supportive and wonderful. She would make my gray days a lot less gray, and toward the end, the roles reversed, and it was my pleasure to talk her down off the ledge when it became really necessary. And I felt it, and she felt the transition. We thanked each other every day. We ended every conversation from the time I was 0 to 42 with "I love you," and she was just so valuable and fabulous, and such a loss to so many people, and just undeniably unforgettable, and always will be. I think about her every day and miss her every day. I still speak to her. And when I have had challenges over the years, you're wonderful, honey, but being a single mother is difficult. I always go to, what would Susie tell me to focus on? How would she help me pull myself up and out? And it always came through. I always remembered. Elephants get their memory from me. And I remember practically everything every conversation we've ever had. And I love her, and I will continue to love her with every breath. And Tommy, we come from a very colorful family, and the book she wrote as a love letter to our colorful family, easy to read. It's a very easy read. It's still on Amazon. And her narrative and the way that she wrote and the way that she spoke and her articulation. And if you look on YouTube, you can see some of the interviews she did about Las Vegas. She did love letters to Las Vegas and her surroundings. She had Liberace's belt from her birthday party where he sang. She had a very colorful life, and she shared it with me. I've shared it with this guy here. This guy here never, he lost her at 4, but she always told him she was his Aunt Susie, and she was prideful about it. And she always entered the room boisterously and loudly with that wonderful high-pitched voice and her beautiful signature look with the shiny black hair and the bangs and the black eyeshadow and the lipstick. I can see her clear as day, and I know she's here. I know she's got her hand right here. She's on my shoulder, and she knows that I would do anything for her in this world or beyond it. And I just love her. And I also want to say that hate was never in my wheelhouse or hers. And for that reason, I will never hate Bobby because she loved him. And I will just live with it, with the memory, and have that as a big part of it, because hate cannot enter my life, no matter what. And she made sure that I always knew, no matter what, hate serves no purpose. And it's what occurred, and the reason that she's not here, and why beautiful, sweet Kathy that I met very young and saw her transition into somebody angry and frightened, just really shows me that the unnecessariness of this is the biggest loss to all of us. And I'm sorry for the Mormons as well. I know that they're in pain. And I just want to say that all of us that knew and loved her were benefited and are benefited from having her as part of our lives. And she's still a big part of mine.
Thank you.
And Tommy's. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay.
Next is Davy Berman.
Davy Berman. Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Berman. Welcome to our court. I'm interested in what you have to say, and make sure you speak to me. Address your comments to me. You may speak as slowly as you wish, and you may speak.
Well, first I want to thank the judge, the jury, prosecution for their due diligence and sticking with it for such a long trial. And this morning I went, excuse me.
Take your time. It's okay.
I visited her and told her he could rest easy. The justice has been done. She just got to know my daughters. She had never met them, but she had written a couple of letters to them. And her and I always had a special bond. And I'd like to say I talked to her and told her she could rest. And can I say something I'd like Durst to do?
You may say what you wish as long as you address it to me.
I'll address it to you. He should let us know where Kathy's body is so her family can get some closure. And that's about it.
Thank you, Mr. Berman, for sharing your comments.
Mr. Berman's daughter, Grace Berman.
Again, to reiterate, thank you to everyone that has been involved and for your determination and your unbelievable strength throughout this process. I will miss Susie. I will miss her phone calls, and I will miss her letters nonstop explaining to go forth and to be strong, especially in the business world. She was very educational and very smart in that area. If I ever had a question or something stumped me, she would always have the answer for me. She was a phone call away. She gave Bobby half of his life of freedom, and that came at a cost of her life. In life, he tortured her when she was alive, mentally, emotionally, and financially on a daily basis. When she decided to get on with her life, that was just too much to bear. And unfortunately, a beautiful person had to take the brunt of that. Whether it was right or wrong, that is what happened. You don't get to just pack up your toys and go home when you're done playing with someone to the tune of murder. I don't expect ill will. Matter of fact, I would like Bobby to live many, many years. To be on record for the longest living predator ever. And with each breath between, from right now on, when you breathe in, you will hear Susan. When you exhale, you will hear Berman. And the ringing in your ears may never stop. Again, I thank you, and we will miss her.
I appreciate that. Thank you. A fourth speaker.
Finally, we have Sarah Kaufman.
Hello, Your Honor, and thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. The question we are meant to tell you about here, what Robert Durst's actions have cost us and what would be an appropriate sentence, is very strange and almost impossible to contemplate, much less describe how I feel and what this has cost me in my life. What would my life have been if Robert Durst hadn't murdered my mother? I could spend the court's valuable time describing the quarter of a century before Susan's murder, the before, during, and after our lives together, the dreams, hopes, plans, and efforts we were in the process of working toward.
You may slow down. I want to hear every word.
How we were all working hard to improve our lives after the unbelievable disaster that had devastated us. I could tell you how every plan, all the work, every choice, and seed planted for a better future were completely ripped away. Then I could articulate how the options, much less the choices, dried up. How the pain and sadness, grief, and mystery of Susan's murder changed everything, and what those changes were starting 21 years ago. The truth is, I can't tell you what life would have been if she hadn't been murdered. It's so long ago, and this has been so all-consuming, I can't remember the details of my previous desires, hopes, wishes, or plans. Much less tell you how they all would have or could have turned out. All I can say is at 47, I'm still in the same type of job, never advanced, no wife, no children, and almost no family because of what Robert Durst has done. How do I describe what I lost in Susan when it was something I never had before and barely had a chance to appreciate? I have no desire to, but all I can attempt to tell you is what life has been since my mother's murder. It has been a daily, soul-consuming and crushing experience. Since my mother's murder, there has not been one day that I've not lived that this has not been at the center of every thought, feeling, choice, or breath I take. I have not had one day off in almost 21 years from the absolute destruction, grief, or pain that this has caused me. My mind, body, and soul tortured by the effects this has had on me every second for 21 years, and likely to go on the rest of my life. I go to sleep angry, wake up angry, eat and drink angry. I can't describe the PTSD or the nervous breakdown I'm still trying to recover from. The extreme stress, depression, anxiety that fills my days. I can't say I remember what I felt like before my mother's murder, much less try to compare it. The absolute chaos that the murder of my mother turned my life into is beyond description. I was in my mid-20s then, finally feeling like I was getting on my feet in life, and did so with Susan's help and support. At a time when her life was becoming more difficult and desperate, she always had time and interest to help me. I should have been working for a career I could be proud of, finding love, getting married, and having children. Instead, I was forced to pay for memorials and bills that were not mine or planned for. Having to spend what time I could manage to not be in tears or feel the hopelessness of going on another day, filing for death certificates, paying for probate lawyers. Having to maintain all day at a job, smile when you want to cry, be strong when you feel weak and tired. And you have to, because if you don't, you will lose that job, and because you don't have the money or time to take off that you should. And any time you are not physically at work, you spend seeking answers to a mystery you can never let go of. The countless meetings and conversations you have to have with people you never wanted to meet, much less deal with. Scramble to make sense of a life of your mother who didn't have a chance to actually prepare for her death, say the goodbyes, and make the arrangements in advance. To spend days and months at the house where she had been murdered, her dried blood and matted hair at your feet, broken up only by the bloody paw prints of her dogs. And you have to be there to pack up her belongings in boxes and find a place to keep them in your 400 square foot, no bedroom apartment. Every item in a box, a dagger in your heart, every box a weight around your neck. I would have paid anything to not have to do that. The list of time and money and pain expended, from big to little, truly go on for 21 years and will into the future. What this has been for me, no one can truly know. I honestly wouldn't wish the knowledge on anyone, much less the experience. Sadly, there are people who can, do, and will have the experience, and some even worse. I can't tell you what life would have been, and I have no desire to tell you what life has been. I only wish to tell you a little of the Susan Berman I knew. There's so much that's been said, truths and half-truths, half-lies, and outright, bold-faced, self-serving lies about Susan, and not just by Robert Durst. I wouldn't know where to start or how not to take days to articulate them all, or how they've added to my anger and frustration. Without Robert Durst in her life, Susan would have been thought of as a true and fiercely loyal friend, putting their needs above her own, and always available when you need it. Someone with a fascinating and tragic history, alone in the world by the time she was 13, eccentric, vivacious, and generous to a fault, often needy and phobic, a force of nature but extremely smart and witty, a hard-working, creative, talented, and complicated person with a lust for life of which the world needs more of, especially these days. This is who Susan Berman was. Robert Durst took those wonderful traits and twisted, exploited, and abused them. So for the last many decades, my mother's memory has also been twisted and abused. Hearing from Susan's friends and family, you never hear of her acting lazy or exploitive. She was not conniving, not a gold digger, not taking advantage of others for her own gain. Despite the description of Susan in the media and in this trial, and except for the most technical of realities, Susan was not a mob princess, doling out mob morality and edicts. Because of Robert Durst, and because of her deep love and sense of protection for her family, she made a mistake. She did something that helped one, but contributed to the pain of many, because of Robert Durst. While the last decades have been a deeper education of the person I knew, and I've learned many things, I can tell you the worst flaw Susan had. She had horrible taste in men, with a few exceptions, of which I count myself among. My mother was flawed, to be sure, but she was loving and committed, and I lost the only person in my life that has ever made me feel that way. Our statements today are meant to be a description of what we have lost because of Robert Durst. I've lost everything many times over because of him. Family, friends, romances, jobs, investments, health, and sanity. I have lost and sacrificed more than anybody can possibly know. I have lived the experience of Robert Durst as no one else has or could. A daily nightmare I have yet to wake up from. However, I feel I need to speak for some that won't, aren't, or can't speak today, but affect me almost as deeply. What Robert Durst's actions have cost my sister Mella beyond the obvious. She and Susan had a falling out before her death. It was a fight, a bad fight, and I know they both hurt the other deeply. But it was just a fight mothers and daughters have. Robert Durst stole their opportunity to reconcile, to forgive one another and reunite in the loving relationship they both worked so hard to have. Susan can't meet Mella's children, who won't experience the profound love she would have bestowed upon them, or feel the love of grandchildren in return. Mella's feelings about Susan stuck in their last interaction of pain, hurt, and resentment because of Robert Durst. In turn, Bob, the damage you did has fractured my relationship with my sister in ways I don't think you will ever recover from, which make us both alone in the world more than we should have to be. Kathy, Susan, Morris are gone. Gone in the most horrific ways imaginable. Vanished, executed, dismembered, gone. Your wife, your best friend, your neighbor, gone. Susan may be the most important person to me personally, but they've all affected me. What you have done, what it forced me to do, what I have lost because of you, Bob, everything many times over. How much has it cost me and my sister? Incalculable and indescribable. You are done, except for a few remaining details. We all know what happened. The belief that you have that has allowed you to continue to lie in the face of morality, ethics, to the face of the judge and jury, because what do you have to lose at this point is over. I hope in your final days and hours you will come to the same understanding and give the McCormicks what little they are asking for, to find Kathy, to lay her to rest appropriately, finally, and at long last. This is the most important question that still haunts us, but I know the McCormicks most of all. Is the one and only thing you have to give of any real value or ability to sway any opinion of you. The final analysis of anyone's life comes from what they leave behind. Actions and how we are remembered are the only real legacy we have. Not the lies, not the words, but the actions. You know your actions. We know your actions. Your legacy is nothing but that of a small, warped, insignificant child throwing murderous tantrums. However, in telling where Kathy is, perhaps you can find some small redemption in an act of humanity. You have murdered the only people who you were ever able to inspire to love you. You took them for granted and abused their love. More than 10 years ago, I received an end to one of the haunting questions that tortures me daily. Who murdered my mother? I was fortunate, if fortunate is what you can call it, to finally solve what happened to my mother and in turn, Kathy and Morris. I was able to lay Susan to rest and know where to find her. I can't imagine the pain of 40 years of not knowing. So I ask this on behalf of Kathy and the McCormicks and in Susan's memory. I ask for what small and I'm sure insignificant apology I can offer to the McCormicks on Susan's behalf for the part she played in their continued pain. I ask this in Susan's memory and on behalf of a part of you I hope truly doesn't want to be seen as the monster you are seen as now. There's no amount of money you can pay and no amount of good deeds you can do to make up for what you have already done. Any hope you have, any hope of any kind of redemption you can find is in letting them know where to find Kathy. I don't know if I really feel like justice is being served today or even can be. Robert Durst was born into a life of luxury and had every option in life, every opportunity, choice after choice. He has been able to do what he wants for almost 78 years, but that wasn't enough for him. The great wealth of his family wasn't enough for him to not steal from others. The unlimited opportunities he had were used only in the most self-serving ways. The ease of his life never colored with humility, decency, or charity. His wealth and luxury were used exclusively to serve his darkest selfishness. We are speaking, Your Honor, so that you can get a glimpse at what Robert Durst's actions have done to us, so that you can come up with a proper and fair sentence. But what sentence could be fair? He has lived his life of luxury and freedom. I can't imagine proper recompense. There's no good deed he can do or time he can serve, even if he had another 100 years of life left. The scales of justice can never be balanced. For whatever time he has left, he will live cared for, paid for by all of us, until he dies, most likely in bed, as comfortable as we can make him, as in an enlightened society. Yes, he deserves the verdict of guilty, and yes, the absolute maximum sentence the law can issue. Yes, it is just. Yes, it is correct, and yes, it is about time. But I don't know what sentence you can deliver that would feel like justice. Another reason for our statements is so that Robert Durst might get a sense or feel in some small way our pain. However, Bob is a sociopath and narcissist in the extreme, and I've known many, my father among them. And rule number one is you do not let the narcissist know that they or how they have affected you. So what is the point but to add to our already insurmountable pain and grief, whose articulation will only serve to satisfy him? I am here because of our losses, because of you, Bob. The people we loved and everything that went with them, we lost because of you. You didn't just murder Kathy or Morris or Susan, you also murdered me. You murdered the person I was, all his dreams and all his hopes gone. He no longer exists. I am a whisper, a wraith of who I once was. My mother's murder and the events of the last 40 years will never leave me. You satisfied, Bob? In conclusion, to this court, All the members of the prosecution, the jury, and the other victims who have spoken, have yet to, and who can't speak. To all our loved ones here and departed, I love and thank you for this opportunity, but especially to Susan, my mother, whom I owe everything to. I love and miss you every day.
Thank you, Mr. Kaufman. Mr. Balian, are you presenting any other speakers?
No, thank you.
Mr. Lewin?
Your Honor, I did want to briefly address the court regarding sentencing. There's no other witnesses that were presented. May I address the court, Your Honor?
Yeah.
Your Honor, I understand that this is a sentence that is life without the possibility of parole. And I think it's important that it be understood that in putting on this trial, it involved flawed people. It involved flawed victims and flawed witnesses. And in presenting the evidence that we presented regarding what Susan Berman did, and the evidence is very clear that she certainly assisted Bob Durst with covering up the killing of his wife. But first, I think it's important to understand that very likely, and the evidence would suggest, that Susan Berman did not cover up what was described to her as a murder. Susan Berman, very likely, as she said to one of her close friends who testified at trial, Bob Durst likely said to her that this was some kind of accident. False, not true. And Susan Berman, loving Bob, believing Bob, trusting Bob, and wanting to believe and trust him, decided to help. So I think it's important that although we needed to understand as lawyers and as jurors what Susan had done, the idea that she knowingly covered up a murder. I've spent a lot of years looking at all the evidence in this case. There is nothing that leads me to believe that Susan Berman was knowingly doing that. In the end, she made the mistake that many other people did in Bob Durst's life. They believed him, and she believed him. And I think it's also important, I've had a unique opportunity in this case to have worked on it for many years, to have interviewed Bob Durst back in 2015 in New Orleans, to have been a part of an incredibly long cross-examination here at trial. And it is our hope that at this point in time, Mr. Durst is certainly never going to see the light of day again. And all we can hope, Your Honor, is that in listening to the passionate statements of the people that he's heard, that maybe he says to himself, you know what, I'm old and I don't know how much time I have left, and I want to actually do something selfless. I want to do the right thing and admit what happened with Kathy, what he did with her, what happened with Susan, what happened with Morris. Yes, there's a conviction. Yes, the jury found that Susan was killed because she was a witness to Bob Durst's concerns that he was going to be prosecuted for Kathy's disappearance and death. Yes, we've proven, I think very compellingly, that he murdered Morris Black, that it was not self-defense or accident. But until and unless he decides that he's willing to actually say what happened, no one will have the answers. There's very little he can do for anyone now. That's the one thing. I tried when I interviewed him in 2015 to appeal to any part of humanity that he might have. I tried when he was on the stand to do the same thing. And I'm just hoping that maybe today, maybe listening, maybe understanding that he's old and he's going to have to, at some point, maybe in the not distant future, to face whatever is next. And that maybe he'd like to do it with as clean a conscience as he can. So I'm hoping, Your Honor, that maybe today, maybe we'll get some answers that we haven't gotten so far. I want to, on behalf of the Durst prosecution team, the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office, I want to thank the court, first of all, for a very difficult trial, for an incredible amount of work, for going through, hearing hundreds of motions. You hear there are commentators out there who have their opinions. They don't know anything about the case. They don't know the work you put in. They don't know the amount of litigation that we've had. You gave both sides a very fair and dedicated and high-level trial, and we're extremely appreciative. I also want to thank the jury, some of whom that are here today. The sacrifice they've made in my 30 years as prosecutor, I've never seen a jury do what they've had to do to come back. We had almost nobody of all those people. They had a get out of jury free card. They could have come back and said, you know what? I can't do it. I'm sick. I'm scared. I have issues in my life. And all of you, there are two, I hope they're spouses or there's been a jury switch. There are two I didn't recognize. Wait a minute. You weren't on this case. Okay. I'm really slipping. We want to thank all the sacrifice. I'm glad there's some spouses here because I know that it was difficult for people in your lives. I've had a chance to speak to some of you since the trial, and I can tell you of all the juries that I've picked in my career, you guys are really, really special, and we are incredibly appreciative for all of the sacrifice. And that, again, goes to the court staff as well, Your Honor. Again, I want to thank the court for everything it's done and for this trial. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lewin.
All right, so all that's left is a very brief sentencing. We're going to let that play, obviously, as well, because you can tell Judge Windham's been building himself. He's been ready to declare all this coming up quick. But I want to put a few things after kind of such emotion. So I do think the fairest sentiment of criticism that was put out there was that there were some things that kind of besmirched Susan's character. I think that her family, friends, people that testified, where some of her manipulation, things like that, like, we all have shitty parts about ourselves. That's just true, okay? And I think that this was a good place and time. I don't blame Sarah for putting that in his statement, because if it was our family member and we felt like there was a lot of spotlight being put on those kind of personality traits, when the truth is John Lewin's very articulate and he's gifted, because you don't just get to come on like we do, hit a button or just speak. I mean, everything has to go in the form of a question, and it's very artful the way you have to get information and get narrative out. And when you're amid a trial, I think it was great that he at least took this opportunity to remind everybody that testimony showed that Susan did not think that she was covering up for a murderer. The level of which she knew that Robert Durst had done any wrongdoing in the matter isn't known. Not known fully anyway. But there were enough witnesses that corroborated the same story, that her understanding that she relayed to them was that there was some sort of accident where Kathy had fallen down the stairs at the South Salem house. It was, so a couple of them said it was like amid an argument. So whether, he ever said anything about pushing, we don't know how that story was couched, but that is the bones of what was presented as evidence in the trial, and the jury, having found as they did, has validated that. The fact finders have found that to be the case. So I think it was good of him to go back and remind that, this wasn't a person who, she didn't know that her dad was a gangster until her late teens. So she got acquainted with like her family lore, if you will, long after her parents were deceased. So the whole mob princess, helping Robert Durst cover up his good deeds, who, somehow blackmailed him for money, and that's why he killed her. It's really a false narrative. I think that was covered enough. I'm not going to undo what he just did with, the fact is that she told him that she had been contacted by the police, and she had not been. She also was trying to survive. That's how she, she's trying to make it. This is somebody, by the way, Susan Berman. Let's just spend some time. Extremely successful writer in New York after college. She wrote for the New York Times. She was a sought-after writer. She's a gifted writer. And then she started writing books. And I'll put a list of her books in the community section when we're done. I actually thought I was getting all of them, but Amazon effed up, and one of them got delivered to the wrong person. So I don't have her first one, which was called Spiderwebs, but she did a novel next, which was Driver, Give a Soldier a Lift. I haven't read that yet. I've started reading Easy Street, which is her autobiography. And then the last one she did was Lady Las Vegas, which her friend referred to as her love letters to Vegas. She was very entwined in the early days of Vegas. A lot of her memories involved the city, and she really loved it. She really did. So this down and out thing was when she moved to California. She moved to California to be a screenwriter, and that was not working out as well. And that's where she fell on hard times. And, she was living in a small home. She was just trying to make ends meet. And I think it's a testament to what kind of friend she was, by the way, and what kind of person she was, that so many were willing to lend her money, because one of the things that you hear about her is how generous she was. I think Sarah had said generous to a fault, but every witness on the stand that knew Susan Berman talked about how generous she was. So when she was doing well financially, she had no problem gifting money, spending money. She was that kind of person, the opposite of Bobby Durst. Okay. So he had helped her out twice. A lot of her friends had helped her out to the extent they were able. And what's interesting is when they went through her computer after she was gone, she had a list, and I'm talking people that gave her $50. Anybody who had lent her money or given her money in that 2-year period, that one of the, I can't remember which friend, had testified on the stand, she did not want her to pay her back. It was again, she was on this list of, Susie kept track, because she was also tenacious. She believed in herself, and she was getting through this. So I'll put it this way. She knew Bobby for a long time. If she felt the need to say something like, oh, New York detectives are calling me, I don't know, you think I should just talk to him? If she threw that in there was a reason, I don't necessarily, I think people do a lot of things to survive when they have to. And this was survival for her. So I'm glad that Lewin did that. I am really glad he did that. And this was, Sarab's statement was one of the most powerful victim impact statements I've heard, in that it was emotional, but it was also very articulate, and that was one thing that just kind of swole up in me as well, where I'm going, I've started reading Easy Street, and I have read through most of Lady Las Vegas. She's a great writer, you guys. Very articulate. If you can Google or look around here, just do the search on YouTube. There's a lot of footage actually of Susan, and she's just very eloquent. She had a way with words. She was a storyteller. She would exaggerate sometimes for dramatic effect, but it's, most of us do that like to talk. So, so she had a way, and listening to Sarah, that's what hit me too, is having very recently started reading her own autobiography, which is from decades ago. You can hear her influence through him. And I think they all did a great job of reminding everybody that Susie's a person who is gone for no other reason than she cared about and loved Bobby Durst. That's it. There's no evidence that she broke any laws. And I think that was fair, and maybe something I had not even thought about, other than I was concerned that an awful lot of the McCormicks deserve their justice. But I worried that there was too little of Susan in this trial, and that's why I think the victim impact statements were really important. We didn't know if we were gonna run it, all the way through. But I'm like, no, there's no use in all the trial and all that if we don't get to hear from the people who have what little they can get from this. There were things I didn't know about the kind of rift between him and his sister, and the fact that Susie died when he and his sister, or when his sister and her were not speaking. That's devastating. That's sad. I think many of us have experience where we have times where we're not in contact with family or have disagreements, or so that's a lot. And I don't think Mela even talked about that on the stand. Or she did, but I think that the way Sarah would put it was pretty, but Sarah, if you remember back to the Jinx too, by the way, Sarah's the one who found that letter. He had no thought. And by the way, nobody in the beginning thought, none of her friends, none of her family ever thought it was Bobby. That's documented too. And it's because she cared about him so much. She never had a bad word to say about him. So some of this, like she's this and that, conniving, that the kind of impressions that were left and that weren't very well dispelled, or weren't highlighted or given the emphasis that maybe they could have been during this trial. I think that was beautiful. I think Sarah did a good job, and I think he fairly, very, very fairly, held the people's feet to the fire for how they overlooked that when they were putting this full painting of, together that they needed to paint for the jury. They could have maybe done better there. So I appreciated what Lewin had to say. There's a Facebook group that someone told me about in chat. Just so you know, it's a Facebook group called Lewin's Ladies. John Lewin is the prosecutor. So he is now 27-0, you guys. This is the cold case expert prosecutor in his jurisdiction. Had never lost and didn't lose this one either. So to John Lewin and his team and the prosecution, it was artful. It was very well done. So that is that Facebook group's out there. I think there's like 60
got the
60 or something of us, but it's just a way to stay on top of what cases he's on and things like that. So if anybody's interested in that, like I said, it's a small group. We go back and forth and stuff, but we'll be watching for when he has his next case. So this is where Judge Windham gets to give his final thoughts to everybody and get to do what he's there for, which is impose the sentence, and you can tell that he has some satisfaction in doing that. So we'll be back right after that. It's very short, to talk about what's new, because there's two big pieces of news. So
Here we go.
Will there be any statements in mitigation?
No, Your Honor. We intend to appeal.
Will there be an allocution by the
No,
defendant?
Your Honor.
He's welcome to do that. As Susan Berman's family has reminded us and described for us in a way that we couldn't have known without them addressing this court, Susan Berman was an extraordinary human being. I personally wish I could have known her. I feel I got to know her vicariously far too late and under terrible circumstances. But she was an extraordinary human being. And killing her was a terrible loss to our community. This is indeed a horrific crime. This crime was a witness killing, and a circumstance of that crime was the denial of justice to the McCormick family. And they suffered terribly due to Kathy's killing, and saw her maligned and denied justice. And that's because the killing of Susan Berman foreclosed any chance of vindication. It's a witness killing circumstance, and the witness who was killed was Susan Berman. So that circumstance of the crime is a special circumstance which, in this case, as in any other witness killing, but in this case perhaps more than other witness killings, was a tremendously aggravated and awful, disturbing crime. The court's read and considered the probation and sentence report, and has considered the statements of witnesses, statements of counsel. The court's aware of the facts and circumstances of the crime. As to count one, the first-degree murder of Susan Berman, with a special circumstance of intentional killing of a witness pursuant to 190.2810 of the Penal Code, it's the judgment and sentence of this court, Mr. Durst, that you be imprisoned in the state prison for the term prescribed by law, that is, life in prison, without the possibility of parole. As to the special allegation that the defendant intentionally killed Susan Berman by means of lying in wait, as described in 190.2A15 of the Penal Code, the same sentence is imposed and stayed pursuant to Section 654 of the Penal Code. As to the allegation that the defendant personally and intentionally used a firearm in the commission of this offense, causing great bodily injury and death, pursuant to 1202.2.53D of the California Penal Code, the court imposes a term of 25 years to life in prison, consecutive. Sentence for the allegations under Section 1202.2.53B and C are stayed pursuant to Section 654. The court will impose the maximum restitution fund fine of $10,000. court operations assessment of $40 and $30 facilities fee. As to victim restitution, Mr. Lewin, Mr. Balian, is there a claim under 1202.4 of the Penal Code?
Your Honor, originally we were informed by the victim's family members that there was no restitution. However, in hearing Sarah today, it dawned on me that perhaps he incurred some memorial fees. So I inquired again of him, and he said potentially, however, his net receipts, etc. Could we just reserve jurisdiction on restitution? Perhaps counsel said he would waive defendant's appearance if there's need for a future hearing, and we can settle it at a future date if necessary.
Mr. Chesnut?
Yeah, what I said to Mr. Balian, out of consideration to Sarah and to Mr. Balian, is we would absolutely discuss with him the issue, and if we had to come back, we could waive Mr. Durst's presence and discuss whatever we need to discuss with the court, or perhaps work it out by stipulation.
Will he waive his appearance now?
Yes. Bob, can I explain it?
Yes,
Explain it to
a
him.
moment. The court will order restitution under 1202.4F of the Penal Code subject to a hearing to identify victims at that hearing. The court will reserve jurisdiction and the people may calendar such a hearing. Mr. Durst has a right to be present. He may waive that right and allow his attorneys to appear for him in any such hearing should it be calendared.
Mr. Durst indicated, yes, Your Honor, by agreeing to work it out. We know the court knows that we're not making any kind of admission as a result of that, but we're not making any kind of admission as a result of that. We just want to be courteous to the state and Mr. Cuff.
I believe I heard him say yes, but let me be clear. Mr. Durst, you have a right to be present at any restitution hearing. Do you waive and give up that right to be present? And allow your attorneys to appear in your place.
Yeah.
He's waived his appearance. The court will retain jurisdiction also for the people of calendar hearing to compel the defendant to pay the cost of his incarceration pursuant to 1203.1M. The court will order a DNA test pursuant to Penal Code Section 296 at sequitur. I ordered a Proposition 63 report. It actually just arrived. Mr. Durst was given an opportunity through counsel to complete such a form. He did not, and nevertheless, the probation department has indicated he has no firearms. Obviously, that's
Leave it to me.
the defendant has been in custody on this case only, according to the defense emergency motion for release on bail filed May 13, 2021. That motion told me that the Bureau of Prisons had released their hold on March 25, 2021. Under in re joiner, the defendant is entitled to credit for that day, part of that day, and any days subsequent. That day is correct, isn't it, Mr. Chesnut?
I'm sorry, Your Honor, the last name.
That day is correct, isn't it?
Yes.
You reported to me. Then 203 days have elapsed, including that day. He has credit for those days only. In re joiner is 48 Cal 3rd 487. I'm sorry, it's People versus Joiner. No parole admonition is required because there is no possibility of parole. Under People v. Scott, 9 Cal 4th, 331, the parties may object to any aspect of the sentence that I have just described. This is your opportunity to allow me to correct any sentencing error I may have made.
We've submitted everything, Your Honor. Thank you.
Submitted, Your Honor.
Mr. Durst, you have a right to appeal from this sentence. If you wish to appeal, you must file a written notice of appeal with the clerk of this court within 60 days from today. If you appeal and you're unable to hire a lawyer, the appellate court will appoint a lawyer to represent you on appeal at no cost. Is there anything further from the parties?
No, Your Honor.
No, Your Honor.
Once again, I'm grateful to our jurors. Without whom justice could not be done in this case. We could not have had a resolution one way or another without you being here and giving so generously of your time and of your lives to participate in this. My gratitude is endless to you. I'm so grateful to you. And to the attorneys, it's been an enormous privilege to behold the presentations you have made. Obviously, it's a rare occasion for a judge to be able to hear such an extraordinary case, an extraordinary presentation by counsel. You, each in your own way, impressed me with phenomenal, unbelievably wonderful work. So thank you for your hard work. Again, to the families, it was very important for me to hear from you, and I know I did not hear from the McCormick family, but I am aware of the disappointment you've felt and the heartbreak you've suffered, and I know that the members of Susan Berman's family also spoke to that heartbreak which you shared. You have that bond, and I just wish you peace going forward from this event, from this trial. Very well. The defendant, Robert Durst, is committed to the custody of the sheriff for delivery to the Department of Corrections forthwith. Department 81 is adjourned.
And that concludes that part of it all.
Yeah. I totally forgot about that. Yes, so they might have some restitution coming for Sarah, so that's good. That's the only thing outstanding. I don't know if that'll get any coverage or not. Bob, of course. And I forgot the fact that, like, as soon we're just done and do the break after the victim impact statement. So really, in real time, what happened is that ended, and within a minute, the judge asks Robert Durst, do you have an allocution statement? So that's his chance to address the court and allocution, make it, his sorries to his victims. That would have been his chance to say something to his wife's family. Oh, I'm sorry, not his current wife. We're going to cover her too, by the way. But to Kathy's family, sitting there, knowing that they don't get to speak, knowing that while this was justice for Susan, this wasn't justice for them, They still can't bury Susan. This was his chance, so after all those impassioned pleas and the moving statements, without hesitation, no allocution statement from Bob Durst. Not a shocker, but is what it is. So there's a couple things. I'm going to start with the less... it depends, I guess, but there's two things that are updated and kind of known at this point. So I'm going to start with the less personal and whatever of the two. They're both equally interesting. September 20th, Andrew Jarecki, who was not required to testify, again, he got some journalistic immunity that California affords witnesses and things like that to not have to testify against sources or be compelled to. September 20th, he gave an interview, his first time speaking out since trial started, to Good Morning America. And I want to thank Rose, who put this in our group and called my attention to it right away, because I was like, ooh. So then I did some digging around, and sure enough, there are plenty of things. The defense alluded to this, and they did give one of their last things. It was their last thing before they wrapped their case, even though they only had 2 witnesses. But it was the last thing they did was to try to relitigate this Andrew Jarecki not having to testify thing. It's one of the things they're citing as grounds for appeal, should they file an appeal, under the basis that he was working on the Jinx 2. In this September 20th interview, he does mention that it's not over yet. The Jinx story is not over yet. So, here's the link. I'm going to put it in there. Everyone take a look. I've done digging around. There are indications that it has been in production. So, trial coverage, things like that. There is some licensing and things like that, buying that are happening that indicate that that's going to be a part of the Jinx 2. So I think this will be very interesting. Nothing else is out there yet, but it's at least confirmation something's in the works that is going to be the Jinx 2, whether it's whatever it's named. No idea yet on the format, when it might be out, anything like that. So Jarecki is good. GMA interview, there's that. I'll put it back into with the title, so that way everyone can keep track. Because if you're like me, I keep a Word document open when I watch videos for when people do things with links to things I want to go back and watch. But I know not everyone does that. And then I end up with links that aren't at all marked, and I'm like, oh, well, these are a bunch. I just have to go back and do them. So check that out if you want, but that's something to look forward to, so that's something that we'll definitely talk about in the future. The bigger news. So I saved the bigger news for last. Honey, you want to pull it up?
There.
So, New York Daily News, you guys. Westchester DA to pursue charges against Robert Durst in 1982 disappearance of his first wife. We talked about this as it closed, before we knew what was going on with verdicts. I am going to link our video where we reviewed sort of the legal wranglings and the history of the McCormick's kind of quest for some sort of justice through the civil system, which, if you remember, included probate, included a lot of things. They've challenged the date of death. They've challenged a lot. But they haven't had a lot of success, mainly because Robert Durst has been able to throw his money at it, and then they hit a brick wall on statute of limitations because New York has never once charged him with shit. So, my last thing that I had to say on that is that, at least from what has happened in California and the Jinx taken in tandem, they have him on at least obstruction of justice. I mean, the fuck, right? Like, I'm angry. Like, I was angry then. I'm angry now that they've done nothing. Because that has been, I think that's been on the table before this trial, if you want to know the truth. But now, I mean, you might as well just call John Lewin Santa Claus, because he picked it up, wrapped it up, bow-tied it for New York to get off their butt and finally do something for this family. The only person who knows where she's at is Bob Durst. I want to remind everybody, and I'm really sorry to have to use his words here, but if you remember in the Jinx, at one point, Andrew Jarecki does talk to him about, well, what do you think in the reopened investigation in 2000. What do you think that they went to the South Salem house looking for? Does anyone remember Bob Durst's answer? His answer was, I don't know, body parts. Okay. So coming from Bob Durst, that is telling. His next door neighbor did testify at this trial. Also was in the Jinx, but specifically during this trial said that they saw lights going over there. I mean, there was a lot going on in the basement level of that home in the night in question, where he had lied and said that he had swung through there to have a drink. He lied about everything. Body parts. I think it's altogether probable. I'm in New Jersey, you guys. The area that he was in, out near Ship Bottom, is right amongst the Pine Barrens. And Google Earth it. It's known as like the mafia, wasteland for a reason. And it's beautiful. I mean, unfortunately, it gets a bad rap. It's really beautiful. But it's no different than people that, dump bodies in the desert. I mean, it's just vast. And it's worse because it's just so hard. You cannot go over with aerials and expect that you're going to see much. And he had a couple days to work with. I mean, I think he's the only one who can ever give them that ability. I mean, they just 5 years ago, did their memorial finally for her without the body. They were holding out hope. Her mom is now deceased, so not all family members have made it to get to see this. So I'm going to read the article really quick so you guys know what we do. So the Westchester, when did this come out? Oh, shit. Or it's not going to let me. Hold on. I'm not interested.
Yeah, you got to do.
I'm like, I'm tired. I don't.
It's just the top.
I'm like using up all my free articles on all the New York stuff. I swear.
The only part of that article of value is those two little small paragraphs.
The Westchester County District Attorney intends to pursue charges against convicted killer Robert Durst. I love it. And real estate heir Robert Durst in the long unsolved 1982 disappearance of his first wife. A source confirmed Friday to Daily News. District Attorney Mimi Roca. I'm going to verify what that, if that's correct because that's a pet peeve of mine. Has decided to take the case to a grand jury in the 39-year-old investigation, as first reported by News 12 Westchester. The source declined to provide any information about the case.
Yeah, and the rest of it is just boilerplate.
The family of Kathy. Okay, no, I'm going to read this. The family of Kathleen McCormick Durst called for a criminal investigation into her disappearance last month after Durst's California conviction for murdering his best friend and alibi witness in the case. The McCormick family is still waiting for justice. They issued in their statement, Kathy is still waiting for justice. Their attorney, Robert Abrams, who is representing the McCormick family and the Westchester DA's office, declined to comment or confirm on a potential grand jury proceeding. But Durst is due back in Los Angeles courtroom for so he already has been sentenced. And that's about it. So
yeah, this article.
Yeah, it goes through all the evidence and
yeah, it's.
So there's a couple things. So them not citing their source worried me. Here's why I decided to go ahead and just report it, if you will, here. There has been communication between the two states. More so recently. Their attorney, the McCormick's attorney, let me find his name because I'm sure it'll be something I'm going to need to know. Robert Abrams. Robert Abrams has made statements to the effect, that kind of give an innuendo that something's on the horizon. The grand jury would be interesting because, like I said, does anybody here who's seen any of this, or even if you just heard about it for the first time here, at minimum, they have obstruction of justice. I mean, that is like a with your eyes closed, blindfolded, so little information about anything needed. Just go and hit the play on that portion of his own words in several different settings over many, many years. And that's that. Because of the foundation Lewin laid, like I said, a jury is a panel of your peers that in essence become your fact finders. They're the only ones who can establish fact in a case. Their guilty verdict made it a fact that Susan Berman made that phone call. He did great things. Like I said, he packaged this up, and it's really, it's the best circumstantial case you can get. I can tell you, in my opinion and from my experience, New York doesn't always play as well for circumstantial cases, but I think that there's plenty of charges for him. That's why I liked the idea of them sending it to a grand jury, because they then get to select what they think the evidence that they're presented shows. It's almost like getting a jury trial before a jury trial. So I find that to be nothing but good news. I'm going to be working on getting some things together, because it'd be great to revisit the legal history of the McCormick family and take a look at what exactly they need to be able to open up their civil suit. Listen, you guys, like, our system sucks, okay? I'm just going to say that. Our system sucks. The criminal system has its own set of issues. The civil system is even worse, because the only thing that it can offer is money. I mean, that's why it sucks. Nothing's ever going to make anything right. Do I think that this guy got $60 million when his brother bought him out of the family business and trust. 20 million of that went to, in my opinion, his allegedly number one fucking enabler, co-conspirator, whatever you want to call her, accessory after the fact, that's what I would call her, Deborah Sheridan. In my opinion, $20 million. $20 million he spent for his wife that he's never lived a day with and left the night that they got married. She's a whole episode under herself. So, yeah, these families deserve compensation, even though money compensates shit. They've been through enough. So at least allowing them to have the civil lawsuit, it'd be interesting to find out, and I'm going to research what the minimum that grand jury could come out with. What's the minimum he needs to be convicted of for them to overcome the only boundary that they've hit, which is that they do not have anything that undoes probate statutes of limitations. So they have been barred because there's nothing that makes her case, because she's still just considered missing. She's been declared dead. Bobby declared her dead the day he was able to do it. The day she was eligible to be declared deceased and him be granted that's what he did. To the day. Not the day after. Not 5 years in a day. He did it on the day of 5 years. So I will look into that, because I think it's interesting to go back, because I'm sure as this starts to unfold, both of these things are rumors. I think they're both rumors with a lot of credibility, or I wouldn't even bother other than to say they're rumors. But there's some wheeling and dealing going on, and Jarecki, I think, told on himself, so I think there is going to be some follow-up to the jinx. And this one makes sense. So if they're getting inside sources who just don't want to go on the record, that does make sense. That happens a lot. I don't know that a circumstantial case will play out as well. I just do not want people to think, anybody who follows us here, to think that if it comes down that he's going to look at less than murder charges in New York, that that's a failure in some way. It's not. Right now, just freaking charge him with stuff. Like, it's okay. If we're going to wait this long, I hope it's a hell of a lot better at this point than just obstructing justice. But anything is better than nothing when it comes to all that. And I'd really love to see whatever the minimum is that will get them over that hump where they're out of probate court in order to pursue a civil action against him. That's what I hope for. And I hope to God Sarah Kaufman takes whatever restitution he gets and goes after this douche for whatever money he has left too. I wish all of them would. I don't know if Morris Black has any, family. I presume not, because they could have gone after a civil suit too. This the bar is much lower. But I'm telling you, the Goldman set the gold standard, in my opinion, on what can be done with that civil system. And Robert Durst is still a wealthy, wealthy guy. And I think money doesn't do much, but it's all that the system can offer. And I think those victims' families are totally entitled to every last dime left in his bank account. And I would love to see anybody but Deborah Sheridan end up with all that money. And that's where I'll leave it. Like I said, things on the horizon, but there's still some unfinished things too that I just think are interesting. I don't plan to abandon this case in terms of, I'm still right.
This chapter
this
has
part,
closure.
just reading that New York Times, reading that
With a little
article
PS.
with it saying convicted killer Robert Durst.
That's enough to.
That's lovely. So I'm halfway through her books. There's no question that there's some memories to be had here. I think I really want to find some things on Morris Black that aren't just crap.
Right.
That aren't spin from Dick to Guerin. But I think that this isn't a case that's going to go away. I think it's gonna happen. So yeah.
Yeah.
I will definitely, so the 2 videos that I'll put on the end card, if you come back to this later, I'll put up the one on the McCormick family and Kathy's family's legal background in terms of what they've been going after. And then I am going to put the interview with Lewin that the defense heavily leaned on in their argument for a new trial that was denied yesterday. Yay. Trying to say he's a witness because he interviewed the murder suspect in a jurisdiction. Yeah, I mean, it was just too much, but I'll put that one there too. So, but yeah.
Alrighty. Well,
I appreciate anybody who can give a thumbs up. It's a quick way to give us a little bit of support. If you're not over, I think everyone here's already a subscriber. Anyone watching in the future, though, like, share, subscribe. We appreciate that. And if you're a gold member or above, we did a gold cooperator. I keep saying gold member, and it makes me giggle, and I'm sorry, because my 12-year-old
gold member, Austin Powers,
Hey, baby.
Mm-hmm.
We put I had a behind-the-scenes one this morning, because this morning was
So there is gold.
This was interesting because we moved it to this
up.
afternoon, so it was an interesting morning just in terms of me having to juggle work and YouTube. So I put my own little behind the scenes, and I don't have makeup on, forgive me, but it was like, you guys get the raw, real thing first thing in the morning on a filming day. So,
so we appreciate everybody watching, and we really appreciate everybody who's joined the channel.
And Tam, thank you so much.
Tam,
that was so generous.
And Sugar Beat and everybody, and
all of our mods,
and the
all of our
crew.
moderators, we appreciate you so much. Addicted to Shoes, thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.
All of our best friend team.
And our friends over at Truth Fortune Teller. Yes, we keep revealing that we are working with them over there, and I think that's getting funny that people keep thinking that they're pulling the mask off at our fucking involvement.
Well, the Mediacratics, you guys, like, people make fun of it. I can't explain it because this is like a Crafton thing. I love that I'm getting some slack for big words, and I'm like, actually, I think I'm the opposite. I tend to speak a lot because I try to either go around the big words, find something like a little more descriptive, or I can't think of them right away. He is the big word master, and I have to keep my thesaurus nearby, but it's because he's an intellectual. Even though he's funny, he says big words that I don't even know.
I pontificate too much. That's what I do.
Oh, is that it?
One day I'll
So what does
learn what
mediocratic
that
stand
means.
for? You explain this to me once.
Mediocratic is just a mediocratic is a person. It's from mediocrity, like just mediocre stuff. So it's like when someone calls you on the phone to tell you about their day, but they're like telling you all this mediocre stuff, and So it's in the Urban Dictionary. A mediocratic is somebody that would get on the phone with you and be like, "I'm painting my nails right now, and that guy's over there walking his dog. I can see that." So the idea of reporting news that may actually be just mundane and absolutely whatever was the initial joke. But I thought it would make an interesting band name. And then of course everybody thinks it's an A and not an O, so they think it has something to do with like a media critic. And I was like, I like that too.
Well, then they just think that you suck and can't spell.
Exactly. All of those things rolled into one.
You,
Addicted
to shoes.
Jeez. So yeah, but what happened was we had several YouTube accounts for these different sections on the radio station, because there was a news division, and then there was the regular mediocratics that every staff at the mediocratics that this channel is associated with. And so we gave, this team of people, I'm not going to say team either, this crew, this
Well, no,
group.
but you have several different,
I donated the channel because we are all
but
in
it's
this
a network.
together.
It's always been a network. It's always
people.
been a network of channels.
Yeah.
And including a radio station.
Right, and there's two of
So
those.
it's interesting that such a
yeah.
big deal is being made, but we are working with them, and it's a place where we can take some of the more dramatic, gross shit that we don't really want to bother other people with.
So feel free to subscribe over there to Truth Fortune Teller, because we all are in on the joke, and we are loving that all these people just are too dumb to fucking get it. It's been
I
pretty
didn't bother
obvious.
to pull a link, though.
Yeah.
Wow. It's Truth Fortune Teller, you guys.
Yeah, there's got to be a link. Yeah, see, this is how involved. I'm like, I think I got a link to it. Yeah.
So the mediocratics is Crafton is often managed pages, so he still has a studio that has their YouTube page under his umbrella of pages, but we had one that was an old one that he didn't use.
Well, there was that news division channel was never fucking used, and it was like, from 5 years ago, it had 2 broadcasts put out on it because there was a different DJ that was going to use that.
Yeah.
And so that DJ left, and we were like, well, we'll just make it the news division channel. And then it was like, well, we're doing that already on the thing.
Even when we got together, you had kind of an idea of having all these different, channels, and it just, like, this channel's a lot of work, you guys. So, there's some that, like I said, are the studio, like, things like that, where it's like, it's other people's pages, but it's, it's
so
kind of, it's Crafton's umbrella of media.
By the way, anybody who thinks that all the doxers out there, I'm kind of taking the power away from the humor here, but it used to be called Mississippi River Radio, so that's what you see, the Miss in the name. So that was really funny too. That's why it was like, yeah, sure, take it. And she was like, well, they'll think I'm a,
Oh, that's the vanity of it.
Yes.
I'm sorry,
they keep thinking that they're like busting us out, and I'm like, it's in the fucking channel.
Oh shit!
Vanity URL. Of course, it was a part of the radio
I didn't
station.
realize that. Okay, you guys, I'm not going to drag you into it too much.
It's
if you
funny.
do like that kind of stuff, though, like little gossipy stuff, so.
There's a lot of contributors to it.
Here's a preview.
And a lot of content.
Here's a
coming
preview.
For that channel.
There's been some hubbub last night and this morning going around that they have figured it out, right? That's why this cracks me up so much, is I'm like, oh shit. It's like, there's the vanity of it. It's like, it's right there. This is not a secret. Yeah. So
I get a threatening email about, I know you are Truth Fortune Teller, and I'm like, A, it's more than one person, so good luck with that. And B, I don't care. I was like, so.
Well, it's under our channels. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like it's there. Hi, Amber Time. How are you?
So, anyway, there's your little nugget of tea for the day. We'll start the
There's
song
Little-
up, everybody.
Or Whittle Dave. By the way, anybody from Watts Island,
Yeah.
Dave and Red
Hi,
X
Amber.
Crime Files have a pretty awesome program lined up for tomorrow.
Yes.
I want to say he said it was 5 or 6 Eastern
I'll
time.
be at work, but you will be there.
I'll be there. See, that's why it's like you're the mod everywhere, and
Right.
I don't get
I'll
it
be the
because you're the
worst damn
worst
mod over
fucking
there.
mod ever.
Yeah. So you'll have to remind them something.
They just
like
don't want me
button
to mod
something.
because I'm
Yeah.
a butthole.
So, all right.
Good to see you,
We'll
Amber.
see.
Everyone have a good rest of your day.
Rest of y'all's day.
Thanks
And
everyone for hanging in.
thanks for joining us to the closure of this chapter of the Durst story.
We have tried to contact you. Well, the WhatsApp tried. Especially cooperate.
My best friend, I'm dancing for you. My best friend. Yum, 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 yum. My best friend, I'm dancing for you. My savage, we will scissor.
I'm the man, son.
Collaborate. Collaborate. Clearly. No, I'm insinuating that that's what I'm insinuating. Especially
My best friend, I'm dancing for you. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 yum. Yum, 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 yum.
we have tried to contact you. Well,
I'm the man, son.
we have tried to contact you. Well, collaborate. We have tried to contact you. Collaborate. We have tried to contact you. Well, that's what I'm insinuating. Insinuating that maybe that's what I'm insinuating. No, I'm insinuating that maybe that's what I'm insinuating. No, I'm insinuating that maybe that's what I'm insinuating.